The release of Wish and the prominent promotion of Valentino as Asha's talking pet goat has sparked a renewed debate among Disney fans as to whether talking animal sidekick characters are really necessary in Disney movies, or if they contribute nothing to their movies' narratives besides being annoying and making the kids laugh. Now, I already made a separate video on how I feel about these kinds of comic relief characters, which you can find a link in the description to, but all of this controversy has caused me to ask, is the whole stereotype even true? Did most Disney heroes or heroines actually have animal sidekicks that could talk? And today, I'd like to go over this topic in extreme detail, to the best of my ability. And there are going to be spoilers ahead for quite a few movies in the Disney animated canon. So in case there's something you haven't watched yet, you might just want to be on the lookout. I won't be giving out any other spoiler warnings in this video. Alright, so just to clarify one thing right off the bat, I will not be addressing any Disney movies that have talking animals as the main character. I only want to focus on Disney movies where the lead character and most of the other characters are human and their sidekick is an animal who talks, because that's often the stereotype that gets a bad rap. And if the main character is a talking animal, then it's pretty much a given that any and all friends they have will also be talking animals as well. So once again, Disney movies with that distinction will not be mentioned here. So with that out of the way, first we have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And while Snow White does have many animal friends, none of them talk. Most display a pretty good range of human emotions, but none of them have any dialogue. The only thing that isn't human that speaks in this movie is the magic mirror, which is an inanimate object, not an animal. And next we have Pinocchio. Now here Jiminy Cricket does talk, as well as a few other animals. But the thing is, while Jiminy Cricket does have plenty of funny moments, he's not really there for comic relief and is instead meant to represent Pinocchio's conscience, so his presence is a needed one. But nonetheless, he does arguably fit the stereotype of a talking animal sidekick. Now jumping ahead, the next movie to fit this mold would be Cinderella. And this might just be where the whole stereotype originated from, as obviously there's the talking mice that serve as Cinderella's only friends. But even then, they're the only animals to talk. The rest of the animals remain completely voiceless, oddly enough. But that being said, while many still do find them annoying, and once again may have originated the whole negative stereotype, it's easy to understand why they were put in the movie. Because as I said in my video on Cinderella, Walt Disney was majorly sugarcoating the darker aspects of the story to make it suitable for children, and the addition of the mice are a big help in that department. And not to mention, regardless of whether or not one finds them annoying, it can't be argued that they do serve an extreme narrative and thematic purpose, and aren't there just to be funny. So, if nothing else, at least their existence is justified beyond being comic relief. Now, the next relevant movie would be Peter Pan, and once again, there's no talking animals to be found here. The only prominent animal, the crocodile, never says a single word. Even Tinkerbell famously never speaks, and she's a fairy. Honestly, I think the closest you could get to a talking animal in this movie are the mermaids, and obviously they're fictional creatures rather than animals. Now I know that everything I just noted is taken directly from J.M. Barrie's original play, But the fact still remains that despite the fantasy setting, the few animals that do appear don't talk. And the same goes for Sleeping Beauty. Despite having many woodland friends just like Snow White, none of them talk. Not even Prince Philip's horse speaks. And again, what's particularly notable is that the three arguably main characters are fairies, and there's still no talking animals in it. I mean, both the hero and heroine do have animal sidekicks, most definitely, but the only point that's relevant here is that they don't talk. Now, the Sword and the Stone is an interesting case because most of the animals don't talk. Even when Merlin and Arthur have turned into animals themselves, the animals they interact with don't suddenly start speaking English. Not even the infamous female squirrel Arthur attracts the attention of. However, there is one animal that does speak, which is Merlin's owl friend and confidant Archimedes. Now, considering the other animals don't speak, it's obvious in this case that Merlin's magic is what allows him to talk. But even then, while he does provide a lot of comic relief, it's far from what one would expect from a Disney movie. Because instead of being silly and happy-go-lucky, Archimedes is very irritable and cynical, often being funny in the fact that he's constantly getting annoyed and throwing temper tantrums in the vein of Oscar the Grouch. But that being said, Archimedes still could be considered a talking animal sidekick, if not one that perfectly fits the stereotype because of his demeanor. Now after that, Disney mostly did movies with talking animals for a while, so the next one that can even be considered would be The Little Mermaid, which of course has plenty of talking animals in it, and most of whom do provide a good chunk of the movie's comic relief. But in this case, it's somewhat justified by the fact that Ariel isn't even human herself and is instead a mermaid, so her having animal friends does make narrative sense. But nonetheless, all of the animal characters could still fit the stereotype. But similar to the mice from Cinderella, at least all of them prove to have narrative significance beyond just trying to make the audience laugh. Even Scuttle, as a matter of fact, and more so than some might think. Next we have Beauty and the Beast, which simply put has no talking animals in it. You've got expressive animals and plenty of talking furniture, yes, but not a single animal that appears ever talks. Now, that may come as a surprise to some, considering how rooted in fantasy the whole thing is, but that's the simple truth. The Beast himself doesn't count either, as he's technically a human that's been transformed into an animal. So just like with the furniture, it makes sense that he can talk. And even if you want to disregard that, we're only looking at sidekicks that provide comic relief, and the Beast is none of that, so the point still remains. Now, next we have Aladdin, which might be one of the most interesting examples here. Because Abu, the stereotypical animal sidekick, doesn't talk, unlike what those uninitiated with Disney would think, but Iago, the villain's sidekick, not only speaks, but is a complete chatterbox courtesy of the one and only Gilbert Godfrey. And moreover, what makes this even more interesting is that he's the only animal in the movie to speak. Any other non-humans that talk are mythical creatures, such as the genie or the Cave of Wonders. And not even all of them talk, as the magic carpet proves. Now, in story, Iago's ability to talk can be explained away as Jafar's magic, and once again there's no question that he serves a major purpose to the overall narrative. But once again, all of that is pretty much irrelevant anyway, since we're only looking at sidekicks of the hero, And Boo, who might otherwise be a perfect example of the stereotype, does not talk. Sure, maybe he has a few discernible words, but he never speaks in complete sentences or carries on an entire conversation. And next there's Pocahontas, where aside from Grandma Willow, who's a talking tree, the creative team specifically went out of their way not to have any of the animals speak because they wanted to keep it more grounded. And the same applies to Hercules. Plenty of mythical creatures talk, but no animals. And once again, that's also true for Mulan. Mushu is the only non-human that talks, and considering he's a dragon, which aren't real, he doesn't count, even if he does more or less fit the mold otherwise. And there's also the fact that he does translate what some of the other animals say, but that doesn't change the fact that they themselves don't talk. And to backtrack for 1 second, some would also argue that the gargoyles from the Hunchback of Notre Dame not only fit the stereotype to a T, but are the absolute worst aspects of it to boot. But that simply isn't true on account of the fact that, as they themselves point out many times, they're made of stone. They're living statues, not animals, and none of the animals in that movie talk, so they don't count for that simple reason. And Tarzan also doesn't qualify for this video because too many of the characters are talking animals, but I already covered all of that before. And The Emperor's New Groove is simply too confusing to accurately cover, which is appropriate for a movie of its nature. Now in Treasure Planet, Morph does occasionally talk, but considering he's modeled after a parrot, he mostly just repeats things other people say and doesn't seem to have an actual vocal range. And not to mention, he also can't really be considered a typical animal. Now after that, the next movie of note would be The Princess and the Frog, which, simply put, very much fits the stereotype. There's quite a few animals that are not only the sidekicks of the main characters, but also speak just as well as they do. Though similar to some of the previous examples, at least their ability to talk is justified by the characters turning into animals and are thus able to understand what they're saying. And once again, especially Ray does contribute quite a bit to the narrative at that. But this is still one that pretty much does fit the mold, I'll freely admit that. But until Wish, anyway, that was pretty much the last movie where the animals talked. In Tangled, the animals remain silent, even if it's obvious they understand what the humans are saying. Even in Wreck-It Ralph, I don't think there's a single animal that talks, despite the setting, with only inanimate objects and mythical creatures displaying that ability. And again, in Frozen, the animals don't talk either. Only Olaf and the trolls speak, but they aren't animals. And down the line, in Moana, Po and Heihei don't talk. In Raya and the Last Dragon, only the dragons talk. In Encanto, Antonio can understand what the animals say, but it's never translated for the benefit of the audience, so it doesn't count. And in Strange World, no animals, real or fictional, talk. Which brings us back to Wish, where one of Star's main powers seems to be the ability to make the animals talk. Now once again, it's Valentino being heavily advertised as a talking animal that started this whole debate all over again. But as this video has hopefully demonstrated, I think it's all kind of been blown out of proportion. Because many seem to be under the impression that a lack of talking animal sidekicks in the Disney movies of the 2010s was something of a novel idea. But once again, that actually goes all the way back to the days of Walt Disney. Because I'll say it again, when you look at the ratio of human-centric Disney movies where the animal sidekick speaks versus doesn't speak, there are a lot more where they don't actually talk than when they do. And even then, an even smaller percentage of them actually fit the stereotypical molding that they are often given. Now, as I touched on before, I believe the whole stereotype and bad rap talking animal sidekick comic relief characters, try saying that 5 times fast, gets mainly comes from Cinderella. Because not only is there really no explanation for why the mice speak, but regardless of one's personal feelings, many do find them annoying. And from there, most just tend to assume that all animal sidekicks in every other Disney movie are exactly the same way. But as I just went over, that simply isn't true. Most of the time, unless there was a reason for it, the animals never really talked. And it's actually much more likely that you'll find inanimate objects or mythical creatures talking, as I also brought up in many of those examples. Now, some might counter all of this by pointing out that there are many Disney movies I didn't go over where the entire cast is talking animals, and that the reason for Disney's reputation regarding them could very well come from that. And that is very true. When you lump it all together, Disney far and away has more movies where animals talk than don't. But I'm not trying to argue that Disney's love and reputation of doing movies with talking animals isn't a deserved one. I'm just simply trying to point out that the stereotype Valentino was trying to evoke, and the whole reason for the renewed debate surrounding talking animals as comic relief characters, was never nearly as prominent as most seem to believe it was. Okay, I think that pretty much ends this video. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that comic relief characters, and specifically the talking animal variety, get an undeserved bad rap in Disney movies? Or do you believe there's more to the stereotype than I'm giving it credit for? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And please keep in mind that you do not have to agree with this video just because you watched it. You can feel however you want to about animal sidekicks and comic relief characters, and nobody can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.